For the last 3 years, the entire story of the AI race has been told through one object, the chip. But while everyone was watching the chips, a different number was quietly deciding the actual outcome. And it has nothing to do with silicon. In 2024, the United States added about 51 gigawatts of new power capacity to its grid. In that same year, China added 429. For every unit of new electricity America brought online, China brought roughly 8, and it turns out that in the race everyone keeps describing as a cheap race, the thing that actually runs out first is not chips, it's power. In this video, I want to show you three things. First, why electricity is becoming the real ceiling on AI. Second, how America built a strategy around the one input it leads in while ignoring the one that's about to bite. And third, the part that matters most, 5 years out, why this gap is extremely hard to reverse no matter who's in the White House. So here's what the chip conversation conveniently leaves out. A chip does nothing sitting in a box. To train and run a frontier model, you need data centers. And data centers are essentially industrial scale electricity furnaces with a roof on top. A single typical data center can draw as much electricity as 100,000 homes. The next generation hyperscale campuses now being built can pull as much as 2 million homes. We are no longer talking about server rooms, we are talking about facilities that consume like mid-sized cities, and we are building hundreds of them. So the real question was never just who has the best chips, it was always who can keep the lights on for a continent of these things. And that question has a very different answer. China overtook the United States in electricity generation more than a decade ago. Today, it sits at roughly 3,200 gigawatts of installed capacity against around 1,300 for the US, more than double, and the gap isn't closing, it's widening on purpose. Between 2010 and 2024, China's power production grew by more than the rest of the world combined. In 2024 alone, China added more new capacity than the United States has added in large stretches of its modern history. They are not building power to meet today's demand, they are building it years ahead of demand, deliberately as a matter of state strategy. Now, look at the American side of the ledger because this is where the official story starts to crack. US electricity demand stayed essentially flat for 20 years. So the country simply stopped building. The grid got old and the approvals got slow, and the AI arrived all at once. And at the end of 2025, data centers needing 241 gigawatts of electricity were sitting in the US development pipeline. That was a 159% jump in a single year. The blunt reality, in the words of the people who actually run the grid, is that it cannot absorb that. At an energy conference this spring, grid operators told data center developers to, quote, get more flexible, which is polite industry language for throttle yourselves during peak hours or we switch you off. Morgan Stanley projects the US could face a 44 gigawatt electricity shortfall within 3 years. America has the best chips in the world and is running out of electricity to plug them into. China has more electricity than it knows what to do with and is racing to make enough chips to use it. One country has the brains and not enough muscle, the other has the muscle and is building the brains as fast as they can. Only one of those problems gets easier with time. Here's where the strategy reveals itself. Washington's entire approach was containment through chips, cut China off from Nvidia's best hardware. The assumption was that the AI ambitions would stall. But you can only choke the input your rival depends on. You cannot choke the input they dominate. The United States can sanction a chip, it cannot sanction a gigawatt. There is no export control that takes electricity away from the country that generates almost a third of the planet's power. And China noticed exactly which lever it held. There's an initiative with a name that tells you everything: Eastern Data, Western Computing. The plan is to physically relocate the most energy hungry data centers out to resource rich Western regions like Inner Mongolia, where the power is cheap and abundant, while the coastal cities handle the lighter work. That is what it looks like when a country treats electricity as a strategic weapon and builds its industrial map around it. A business school director studying this put the hierarchy more cleanly than any government has. The winners of this cycle, he said, will own the silicon, the power contracts, and the cooling water in that order. America built its whole strategy around the first item on that list and quietly assumed the other two would sort themselves out. Even Elon Musk, hardly a China booster, said the quiet part out loud earlier this year. Very soon, he warned, we will be producing more chips than we can actually turn on. Except, he added, for China, because China's growth in electricity is tremendous. When the man selling the picks and shovels tells you the problem isn't the picks anymore, it's worth listening. Now, the optimistic case: America has woken up to this. Capital is pouring in 2026 alone. The big four, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, and Alphabet, are projected to spend around 630 billion on data dollars on data centers and AI infrastructure, vastly more than China's tech giants are spending. So surely money solves it. Here's why I'm not so sure, and it's the whole reason this matters. You cannot conjure a national grid with a checkbook in 3 years. A cheap fab is hard, but a chip is a product. Electricity is infrastructure: power plants, transmission lines, transformers, water for cooling, and permits that take the better part of a decade to clear. The $630 billion buys the servers, it does not buy the electrons to run them, and it certainly doesn't buy the years of grid building that should have started 15 years ago. That's the difference between a gap you can close by writing a bigger check and a gap that's baked into the physical world. By 2030, China is projected to have somewhere around 400 gigawatts of spare power capacity surplus sitting there just waiting. That's roughly triple the entire world's projected data center demand at that point. America, in the same window, is forecasting shortfalls measured in the tens and then hundreds of gigawatts. So when you hear that America is winning the AI race because it has the best chips, understand what that sentence is actually measuring. It's measuring the one lap America is ahead on while ignoring the lap that decides the race. The chip war was the war America knew how to fight. The power war is the one it didn't see coming. And the uncomfortable truth is that you can invent a better chip in a lab in 18 months. You cannot invent 15 years of power infrastructure in a press release. The brains are American, the muscle is Chinese, and in the end, a brain with nothing to power it is just a very expensive idea.